Good morning, Warriors. Today is Monday, June 29th, 2026. Welcome to Morning Adrenaline. It is time to wake up the warrior. Listen, today I'm going to dive deep into the one thing shaping every decision that you make. The one thing holding you back from becoming the highest value version of yourself. The one thing stopping you from achieving your goals faster, if at all. The one thing that keeps you playing small. The one thing that if you could just crack the code, you'd finally live the life you've always dreamed of. And most people will go their entire lives without ever realizing that this one thing even exists. And the frightening part, the one thing may have started changing you before you even understood who you were. So imagine watching a sculptor begin with a solid block of marble. He doesn't build a masterpiece all at once. He removes one small piece, then another, individually and independently. And none of those tiny cuts seem important. But after thousands of them, the stone has become something completely different. Look, your life works the same way. You don't typically become a different person because of one massive event. You become a different person through thousands of tiny moments that seem insignificant while they're actually happening. A careless moment, a disappointment, a rejection, a failure, maybe even a success, a comparison, a compliment, a criticism. Most of these moments don't even register with you consciously. They simply leave another mark. Another tiny cut, another quiet change. Then one day you wake up and you wonder why you hesitate, why you doubt yourself, why you keep repeating the same patterns. You assumed it all happened overnight, but it didn't. You've been changing for years. So the question is, who or what has been changing you? So I'm calling today's episode The Day You Became Someone Else. And yes, the one thing we've been talking about is your thoughts, but not the thoughts you're aware of, the ones that you're not. Because the most dangerous thought you'll ever have is the one you stop questioning. One thought left unnoticed, left unchallenged, and repeated over time. And that can quietly shape the rest of your life. And it's not because it's true, but because your subconscious eventually accepts it as truth. So think about that. A child hears you're not good enough, and years later, the adult says, I've just never been confident. A student fails one test, and years later, they believe I'm not smart. Someone gets betrayed, and decades later says, I can't trust anyone. That event's long gone, but the thought remained. And the thought became a belief, and that belief became your personal identity. And the identity began making decisions long before the conscious mind ever realized what was actually happening. So here's what's even more unsettling. Most of us believe we're consciously thinking our way through life, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. But much of the mental processing that drives our decisions happens beneath our conscious awareness. So you probably heard some of these numbers. 95% of your thoughts are operated by your subconscious mind. But here's the more dangerous part. 75% of those thoughts are negative. Now, whether those exact percentages are perfect or not, the warning doesn't change. Your mind is constantly rehearsing patterns. Some build you, others quietly limit you. And if you don't know those patterns exist, you can't question them. And if you can't question them, you can't change them. So they continue to make the decisions for you. They tell you not to apply, not to speak up, not to start the business, not to trust, not to love, not to lead. And it's not because you're incapable of any of those things. It's because somewhere along the way, a thought became a belief, and a belief became the person you started believing that you are. So today, we're going to expose the entire process. I'm going to uncover how subconscious thoughts become subconscious resistance and how that resistance quietly keeps you out of flow, and how to reverse the process so your mind begins working for you instead of against you. Because one thought repeated over years doesn't just change the way you think, it can quietly change the way you live your life. So let me ask you the question of the day, and I don't want you to answer it too quickly because it's kind of a challenging one. What pattern in your life keeps repeating that the person you know you're capable of becoming would never choose? Maybe you procrastinate even though you know exactly what needs to be done. Maybe you avoid difficult conversations because conflict makes you uncomfortable. Maybe you keep settling when you know you're capable of so much more. Maybe you sabotage healthy relationships. Maybe you quit too early. Maybe you never start at all. Whatever it is, don't judge the behavior. It's actually time to study it because your behavior always leaves clues. Now, don't miss this. And I hope you have something to write down some notes. Most people spend their lives trying to change what they do. Very few people stop long enough to ask why they keep doing it. So here's the shift that I want you to make. Don't actually start with the behavior. Start behind the behavior. Stop asking yourself, how can I change a weak or limiting behavior? Instead, ask this. What thought would I have to keep repeating for this behavior to keep running on replay? See, your behavior isn't random, it's evidence. Evidence of a thought you've repeated so many times you no longer realize it's even there. And if you can find the thought, you've just found the beginning of your mental freedom. So listen, if what I've said so far makes you even a little bit uncomfortable, good. Because discomfort is often the first sign that something hidden has finally been exposed. So here's what I want you to do. I don't want you to leave this episode thinking that was interesting. I want you leaving the episode understanding exactly why you've been fighting yourself for years. And why do I assume you're fighting yourself? Because we all do. But realizing that the fight was never against you in the first place. It was against subconscious programming that you never consciously chose. So here's the good news. Which was programmed can be reprogrammed. Not someday, not years from now, but starting right now today. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through 4 laws that explain exactly how a single thought can quietly become a limiting belief and how that belief becomes your personal identity, and how that identity creates the invisible resistance keeping you from becoming the person you know you're capable of being. But most importantly, how to reverse the entire process. You stop blaming yourself and you finally start changing yourself. So let's begin with the first law, because every transformation starts with a single thought. So the first law of thought transformation is every thought leaves an imprint. If there's one thing I hope you remember from today's episode, it's this. Your mind is never neutral. Every thought you repeatedly entertain is casting a vote for the person you're becoming. One thought you have today, no matter how disempowering it may be, won't define your future. But one troubling thought repeated day after day, month after month, year after year, absolutely can and absolutely will. That's because every repeated thought leaves an imprint on your subconscious mind. See, most people think thoughts simply come and go. They don't. Some do disappear, but the ones you repeat stay. So think about it like this. Think about it like a path through a forest. The first time you walk it, there's basically no trail. Then you walk it again and the grass begins to bend. You walk it every day for years and eventually you've created a road or a path. Your thoughts work the exact same way. Every time you repeat, I'm not good enough, I always mess this up, I'm not a leader, I'm not disciplined, you walk the same mental path again and again and again until one day your subconscious stops treating it like a thought. It starts treating it like a destination. So that's why this law matters. Because your subconscious isn't constantly asking, is this true? It's asking, is this familiar? And whatever becomes familiar begins shaping your identity. So remember this, every thought is casting a vote. The question is, who are you electing to become? See, that's why you must become the guardian of your own mind, because every thought you repeatedly allow to stay is quietly introducing you to the future or reintroducing you to the past. And once enough thoughts leave the same imprint, they become something far more powerful. Now they become a belief. So this brings us to the second law of thought transformation. The subconscious believes what you repeat. See, the subconscious mind has one primary job: to make what is familiar feel normal. It doesn't wake up every morning asking, is this true? It asks, have I heard this enough to believe it? See, that's a dangerous differentiator. Your subconscious doesn't care where the thought came from. It could have come from a parent, a teacher, a coach, a bully, or maybe an event like a failed business, a painful divorce, a social media feed or post, or how about this? How about a news headline? Or it could just be your own inner voice, but it only knows one thing: repetition. That's why one painful experience usually doesn't define your life, but the story you repeat about that experience does. So think about someone who fails at starting a business. The first thought is, I failed. The thought itself isn't the problem, but it becomes, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm just not good enough. I'm not built like other successful people. Listen, I want to just stop for a second, and I want you to observe what's running through your mind at this point. What are you noticing about yourself? What thoughts are popping into your mind right now about this conversation? What is the thought that reoccurs too often that is limiting a very specific and powerful result that you want? And if you have something to write with or a way to take a note, write it down. Put it in a text note. But the more important question is, how long are you going to live with this disempowering thought that has formed an identity you weren't born with and certainly doesn't serve you well? So let me go back and pick up where we left off. The next thing that happens is the subconscious begins accepting those thoughts as your reality. Put another way, you've accepted a lesser version of yourself, even though consciously you likely have very high expectations of who you want to be and who you're trying to become. So eventually those beliefs become instructions that quietly influence every future decision. So you hesitate, you play small, you avoid risk, you stop believing before you even begin. And it's not because you're incapable, but because your subconscious is simply following the instructions it's been given. See, the subconscious doesn't follow facts, it follows familiarity. That's why so many people stay trapped. Not because you're weak, not because you're lazy, but because you've spent years rehearsing a version of yourself that no longer deserves to lead your life. You've been rehearsing an identity. Every fearful thought, every limiting belief, every excuse, every moment of self-doubt has been another rehearsal, and eventually you become the role you've practiced the most. That's why changing behavior alone never lasts, at least not long term. Your behavior follows the belief, so the behavior can't change without changing the belief first. And belief follows repetition. If you want to permanently change your life, you have to change what your subconscious has accepted as familiar. Because once a belief has been accepted, it doesn't stay a belief for long. It now becomes something even more powerful, or in this case, disempowering. It becomes your identity. And that's exactly where the third law of thought transformation begins. Your identity determines your reality. So we've already learned that every repeated thought leaves an imprint. We've learned that repeated thoughts become beliefs. Now we're about to uncover the part not enough people recognize as truth. Those beliefs do not stay beliefs. They become your internal identity. Not your God-given identity, but your adopted identity. And once something becomes your identity, it begins making decisions before your conscious mind even has a chance to. That's good. Let me say that again. Once something becomes your identity, it begins making decisions before your conscious mind even has a chance to. See, your identity doesn't just influence your life, it's your life's filter. If your identity says, I'm not confident, you'll hesitate before you speak. If your identity says, I'm not disciplined, you'll negotiate with yourself every morning. If your identity says, I'm not worthy, you'll settle for relationships, careers, and opportunities that match that belief. And it's not because that's who you truly are, but because your subconscious is trying to stay consistent with the identity it has already accepted. So this is where your internal resistance is born. You call it procrastination, you call it self-doubt, maybe you call it fear, but underneath every one of those behaviors is an identity trying to protect itself. See, the internal resistance alone isn't your enemy. It's your weak identity fighting to survive. Think about that. Every time you try to grow, the version of you built by years of repeated thoughts whispers, stay. Stay where it's familiar. Don't take the risk. Don't speak up. Don't fail. See, that's why discipline feels exhausting for so many people. They're trying to force behaviors that their identity hasn't learned to support. So you fight yourself every single day. And that's exactly why so many people never experience the state of flow or being in the zone. See, you might be thinking that flow is reserved for elite athletes or musicians or millionaires, but it isn't. Flow is simply what happens when your identity and your actions stop arguing with each other and fight forward as a team together. See, when the subconscious no longer pulls against the direction your conscious mind wants to go, that's where flow begins. When action becomes natural instead of negotiated, when growth becomes consistent instead of exhausting. And listen, flow isn't something you stumble upon. You don't snap your fingers and jump into a state of flow. Flow is what remains when internal resistance is removed. And that is the life that every single human being, every single one of us is capable of. And it's not because we're going to make life easier. Life is life. The script has already been written. It's not because life becomes easier, but because your mind finally begins working with you instead of against you. So the question is, how do you remove years of subconscious programming? How do you stop rehearsing that old identity and begin living from the person you were created to become? So that brings us to the fourth and final law of thought transformation. And it's the law that changes everything. The program can be rewritten. Look, we've uncovered how a thought becomes a belief, and we've uncovered how a belief becomes an identity. We've uncovered how that identity quietly creates the resistance that's been keeping you from becoming the person you know you're capable of being. Now comes the most important question. Can it be changed? And the answer is absolutely yes. Because the same mind that learned those patterns can learn new ones. Look, I hope you guys brought your notebooks today. The same mind that learned debilitating patterns can learn new patterns that serve your true God-given power identity. The same subconscious that accepted limiting beliefs can release them. The same identity that was built through repetition can be rebuilt through intention. But here's where most people get stuck. They try to change the behavior itself without changing the subconscious that created it. They promise they'll be more disciplined, more confident, more productive, more consistent. And for a few days, you probably actually succeed with that. But guess what happens? The old identity quietly pulls you back, because behavior alone can't permanently overcome an identity that's still rooted in fear. See, you don't solve an identity problem with willpower. You solve it by changing what the subconscious believes to be true. You don't transform your life by fighting your old identity. You transform your life by replacing it. So how do you actually do that? You have to reverse the same process that created the problem. If repeated thoughts created limiting beliefs and limiting beliefs created your identity, then lasting transformation has to happen at those same 3 levels. So first, your identity First, you identify and shift the recurring thoughts that have been quietly running in the background. Then, you expose and replace the limiting beliefs that those thoughts have created. And finally, you reinforce the identity of the person you consciously chose to become. So look, this is what we do at Sisu Vita. It's exactly what we do. And let me explain something. We're absolutely not a motivational program. This is not another habit tracker, and it's not another morning routine or positive affirmation. But it's a framework designed to work at the same 3 layers we just talked about. So let me lay it out for you. We use problem shifting, a method, to help uncover and transform recurring negative thought patterns before they continue reinforcing the same mental loops in your mind. We use belief shifting, which helps expose and replace the limiting beliefs that have been quietly directing all of your decisions. And we use identity shifting, which helps reinforce the identity you intentionally choose so your subconscious begins working with you instead of against you. Because when the thought begins to change, the beliefs begin to change. And when those beliefs begin to change, the identity begins to change. And when your identity changes, your actions finally become aligned with the person you've always been capable of becoming. You don't change your life by being grittier. You change your life by changing the person your subconscious believes you are. See, the goal was never to become someone new. The goal has always been to remove everything that convinced you that you weren't capable of resetting back to your power identity. So this is how resistance begins to disappear and how flow begins to appear. And that's how you stop becoming the person your past programmed and start becoming the person you were created to be. So listen, before we leave today, I want you to remember something. You didn't wake up one morning and accidentally become the person that you are today. You became that person one thought, one belief, one identity at a time. And this should give you encouragement, because this is exactly why you can become someone different. The same process that shaped your current version of you can now serve to rebuild the original power version of you back. So today we uncovered the 4 laws of thought transformation. Every thought leaves an imprint. The subconscious believes what you repeat. Your identity determines your reality. And most importantly, the same mind that learned those patterns can learn new ones, which again should give you hope and encouragement moving forward. Because it means your future isn't waiting for better circumstances, it's waiting for a better story. And not the story your fears have been telling. The story you consciously choose to repeat from this day forward, because let's face it, you have people depending on you. It's time to become the hero of your story, not a villain in it. Remember, your subconscious doesn't wake up tomorrow and suddenly become someone new. It defaults to the level you program it to be. So program it wisely, because every thought is casting another vote. Every belief is reinforcing another identity, and every action is introducing you to the person you're going to eventually become, whether that's good or bad. You don't become your future overnight. You become it one repeated thought at a time. And remember, when resistance begins to disappear, flow begins to appear. And when flow returns and appears, discipline stops feeling like a fight. I promise you. See, the greatest battle you'll fight will never be against the world. It will be against the story your subconscious keeps repeating about who you are. So here's my final question. If your subconscious keeps repeating the same thoughts tomorrow that it repeated today, and that pattern continues unchecked, where will you be 5 years from now? But here's the better question. What thought are you going to stop believing today? Starting right now. See, we have the tools. You just need to use them, and things will change for you rapidly. And maybe today wasn't the day that you became someone else. Maybe today was the day you stopped letting your negative programming decide who you're going to become in the future. Maybe today was the day you finally took your mind back. Until next time, work your body, feed your mind, build your soul. Wake up the warrior.
Wake up the warrior, wake up the warrior, wake up the power inside. You've been running on empty, stuck in your mind, fighting shadows of a story you left behind.